right, good evening, everyone. If you want to go ahead and take your seats, we're going to go ahead and start our forum tonight. All right, so let's go ahead and have Ms. Sonia D. Hester to come up with a welcome and occasion, and she's going to be followed by greetings from Dr. Ray Belton. Let's give her a hand as she comes.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much to the brilliant minds and concerned hearts gathered in the room today for being here. Again, my name is Sonia D. Hester, and I welcome you to Southern University at Shreveport on behalf of our distinguished faculty and faculty united across this state. It appears that higher education is under arrest. Because she is not free, she cannot fully aspire to her full purpose. Today, it is our goal to unlock the steel bars of bondage through fruitful dialogue that will translate into meaningful action. Legislators, when your sessions begin April 13th, we implore you to take the spirit of this conversation tonight with you. At this time, please come forward our illustrious Chancellor, Dr. Ray L. Belton.
I was just thinking, I had the great privilege of observing Professor Hester as she engaged in the diligence necessary to bring this about. And it's quite evident from this impressive array of panelists that she did some good work. So let's give Professor Sonia Hester a round of applause. I also come bringing greetings on behalf of the faculty and the staff, and most importantly, the students of Southern University at Shreveport. And I have to say that I'm pleased that you've joined with us this evening here at Southern University's Metro Center. This center, by the way, houses our allied health programs and our School of Nursing. And interestingly enough, all of those programs require students to take some type of registry to demonstrate their competencies. We have a faculty here, and we tend to suggest that our students, by way of their performance on these registries, define Southern, but indeed our faculty define our students. And so for all our faculty and for other faculties, I also would like to applaud you this evening for what you do for higher education and for the students we have an obligation of serving. The forum, the future of Louisiana higher education. Wow, I was amused on yesterday. My CFO brought me a spreadsheet that was published by the Office of Planning and Budget. And on this spreadsheet, it had a printout of all the institutions of higher ed in the state. And I gravitated to Southern University at Shreveport and saw that in light of the executive budget as presented by Bobby Jindal, our governor, that Southern University would have to absorb this campus an 80% cut in its general fund. I didn't laugh, but I did smile at that. And with the proposed, if you will, remedy in terms of the renewed effort of looking at tax cuts, that cut translated to about a 30% cut of our general fund. But I can tell you that 30% over the course of the last 6 years, and now 30%, that was crippling. And so the question lies, the future of higher education in the state of Louisiana. I question whether or not higher education will be decimated without some type of relief. And so indeed, I'm actually very pleased to be afforded this occasion, Professor Hester, to hear from these panelists as they discuss this. And indeed, just really pleased that the faculties across the state of Louisiana and their voice will articulate these issues on behalf of all of us. So thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening.
Please allow me to take a point of privilege in thanking my mentor and dear friend, Dr. Kevin Cope, who was instrumental in helping us to bring this to fruition, along with our Southern University Shreveport Faculty Senate. This is a forum that took place November the 18th in LSU Baton Rouge. And I asked my friend a question: why can't we expand this conversation and bring it north of the state? And he said, why can't we? So here we are. Thank you, Dr. Cope. Kirsten.
All right, we're going to move a little further in our program with the introduction of our panelists. Now, I'm going to go through the line and introduce everyone, and then we'll give you a moment to kind of introduce and say some words of greetings to the audience. First up, we have Dr. Kevin Cope. He's the Faculty Senate President at LSU Baton Rouge. Next up, we have Attorney Preston Castille with Southern University Alumni Federation President. Next up is Ms. Markey Pierre. She's the Managing Partner of Southern Strategy Group. Dr. James Kirylo, am I pronouncing that right? Kirylo, I'm sorry about that. He's the Faculty Senate President at Southeastern University, or Southeastern Louisiana University. Dr. Herbert Simmons, Faculty Senate President for Grambling State University. And Mr. Patrick Jefferson, Louisiana State Representative, District 11. Dr. Brian Southchemistry at LSU-S. And Mr. John Bell Edwards, Louisiana State Representative, District 72, and gubernatorial candidate. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Fabulous introduction, and I would certainly like to thank Sonia Hester, who, although she credits me with inspiring this event, has proved herself to be a phenomenon in Louisiana higher education. What she's accomplished in the last 9 months as Faculty Senate President at SUSLA and also as the new Secretary for the new AAUP chapter here is nothing short of breathtaking. Never seen anything like it. The best thing about introductory remarks is that they are brief. The life of an event such as this is a matter of discussion and exchange of ideas, so I'll keep my few comments here short. Just want to mention that on the way up here, I saw the validity of what my dissertation director once told me, which was that the humanities, and by extension, academia, is always in crisis. As I was riding up here, a small crisis erupted on the cell phone. I got a message from the illustrious Sanjay Menon from LSU-S, indicating that there was a colleague thinking about not attending the event tonight for fear that there might be no new information. But of course there is new information here, thanks to Sonia and thanks to our Susla colleagues, thanks to Chancellor Belton. We have an assembly here of what looks like nigh on 75 people coming out during the dinner hour in what for them is perhaps an out-of-the-way location to show that they are prepared to make a decision. That the day is over when the passive Louisiana audience would simply sit by, wait for the legislature to do something else goofy, and then try to figure out how to get out of the maze. We're all here trying to show that we are prepared as educated professionals and people who count, people who vote, people who make money, people who pay taxes, and people who contribute to this society to assist in the decision process, and that the day of silence among public servants is over and over forever. One of the points, thank you very much, silent round of applause, always welcome. One of the points that an event like this always makes is that culture, education, knowledge has value. I don't know how it is that we lost track of this. We get confusing messages. One day we're told that the future is in producing petroleum engineers, and yet, given the plunge in the price of oil, we see more unemployment there than we do people who are entering nursing programs, such as Chancellor Belton and his staff have created with such proficiency. How is it that we lost track of the idea that education is valuable? How did we forget that somehow or other the education of teachers to contribute to the making of a good society carries with it a financial obligation and a financial merit as well? This is a state that has money. It's not the poorest state in the Union by any stretch of the imagination. It has mineral resources. One former governor, Buddy Roemer, suggested at one time that we should try to join OPEC. Maybe that wouldn't be fashionable nowadays, but it points out that Louisiana is far from the banana republic that it's often credited with being. And so we have to ask, again, as we make our decisions, how is it that we came to think of ourselves as poor? How did we end up with a system that not only divides revenue, divides income between the haves and the have-nots, but puts institutions, particularly institutions like SUSLA and LSU-S, and even the medical center, which after all is a semi-charity institution, puts institutions that serve the people and serve the poor at such an extraordinary disadvantage. It is, I think, the value of a meeting like this that we start to look at what it means to be engaged in public service and in helping the public good. About a year ago, King Alexander down at LSU, in one of his styling and profiling moments, held an Obama-inspired federal hearing about public education. And one of the first things that happened was that all of the representatives from the private colleges, and including among those in the religious affiliated colleges, came out and said, you know, your new ratings criteria somehow forget about those of us who train people not to make a huge salary, not to pile up investments, but instead to work in social service agencies, to help those who have suffered from the criminal justice system, to help those who might be mentally disturbed, and so forth. How is it when we talk about workforce development in Louisiana, we've also forgotten that? My last word then is to congratulate Professor Hester and Chancellor Belton and the many staff members here for having provided this facility and having us focus our attention again on what it means to be a servant of the public, what it means to be an institution that serves not a small group of industrialists, 86 out of 87 of whom on the management board look exactly the same as one another. I should say it's 86 elderly white men and one black woman who rule higher education in Louisiana. How is it that we came to trust them and not ourselves? How is it that we came to forget that we are the ones who are advancing the public good?
All right, Dr. I meant to say this at first, and I got so excited about your speech. I want to let everybody know that we're going, in the interest of time, we're going to stay here till 8 o'clock. We have a lot of information to get through, so if you would keep your introductions to 2 minutes or less. I do have a timer. I'd hate for it to go off. All right, go ahead, please.
I think, is my mic on? Yeah, it's on. I think after hearing Kevin, I think we can just kind of sit by and let things go as they may. But nevertheless, I'm honored to be here representing the faculty senate at Grambling State University and to continue a discussion on higher ed in Louisiana. And certainly we're very, very concerned about Grambling State University, HBCU, Southern University. So I'm not going to take up a lot of time, but I want to thank Sonia as well as Chancellor Belton for hosting us here tonight. I do want to say this. When I talked on yesterday with Ms. Hester, and I thought that the weather perhaps would prevent us from being here today, but she called me bright and early today and said, oh, it's on, you've got to be here. And so when Sonia Hester calls, you know, the earth shakes, and so we have to meet. So, but anyway, nonetheless, I'm delighted to be a part of this discussion. And I hope that when we leave here tonight, those of us who are truly concerned about higher ed will leave with a different photo, a different picture of where we are and where we must go. It's a challenge, but I think it's one that we must tackle head on and so to do some I call untraditional things to preserve higher ed in Louisiana. That was said, I'll yield to my friend next.
Looks like they said it all. Is this on? Can you hear me out there?
In the rafters? All right. Thank you. My name is Markey Pierre, and I'm the managing partner at Southern Strategy Group here in North Louisiana. I'm a professional advocate for higher education. In my day job, I am an advocate and provide a voice for those clients that I represent. And I've had the opportunity to speak out on behalf of higher education for our institutions across the state. I'm excited about the dialogue that we're going to have here today. It's especially refreshing to see the interest in what's going on at the state level when it comes to crafting higher education policy. at our budgets. As you know, those individuals that actually craft the legislation and prepare the policy that impacts us on a daily basis are the ones that you actually elect. And so you have a voice, and this is a great opportunity to begin expressing those views and educating yourself. So I am really excited about the opportunity. I thank those organizers that have allowed us to be here, and I look forward to continued conversation.
Hi, my name is Preston Castille. I'm the National President of the Southern University Alumni Federation. And I just want to say welcome to all of the Southern University folks that we have here in the audience, and give yourselves a great round of applause. You know, the Southern Alumni Federation represents about 80 chapters around the country, around the world. We've got about 100,000 at least alums that we're keeping track of. And so obviously those alums are watching what's going on. I happen to have the great fortune and pleasure of being a keynote speaker for Monday's Founders Day program. So I'm sort of immersed in the history of the university right now. And what's really heartening about this panel is that when I think about Southern being founded 135 years ago in New Orleans and then moving to Baton Rouge 101 years ago, and that how the folks in Louisiana were very separate. But because of this crisis that we have here in Louisiana today, in 2015, so many people have come together around this very important issue of higher education. I will tell you that I'm almost grateful for this crisis, because I've gained so many new friends from LSU, from the UL system. I'm sitting next to the next governor of the state of Louisiana, I couldn't have manufactured a better crisis, but given that I might have been the one to manufacture it, hopefully I will have the ability with all of you to make it go away. And so I look forward to the discussion tonight. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And no, he didn't manufacture the crisis. That was the goofy legislature that Dr. Cook was speaking about, along with our governor. And of course, I've been privileged to be a member of the legislature for the last 7 years. This will be my 8th general session coming up in April. And I'm here with my vice chairman on the education committee that I've sat on for the last 7 years, and Patrick Jefferson, and joined by Roy Burrell. So thank you, Representative Burrell. Look, I hope we can have an honest conversation, but the honest conversation has to start tonight, but it's got to follow us all the way to Baton Rouge, because for too long we sit in the legislature and members of the higher education system, whether they're university presidents or system presidents or commissioners of higher education, come in and tell us how they're doing more with less, and they'll probably tell us how they're struggling to keep the lights on, but when they make public statements, they don't give the same sense of urgency, and that's because they're afraid that they're going to lose students if they tell the truth. Well, let me tell you, there's a whole lot more to lose than just students if we don't start telling the truth and start making sure people understand that this is an urgent situation. So I'm pleased to be here tonight. Hopefully we can have an honest conversation that starts here and carries forward all the way.
It's my honor to be here. Again, my name is Kirylo, and I'm a professor of education at Southeastern University, and also I am the faculty senate president. And there are obviously multiple reasons how we got to this point. And one that I think is at the top of the list is a frame of thinking that fosters what can be characterized as the marketization or the corporatization of education, particularly as it relates to K-12 education, by extension as it relates to teacher education. I'm a teacher educator, so it's from that position that I speak. Just in brief, the corporatization of education promotes individualism, competition, profit, and privatization, which disturbingly, though quite successfully, has largely shaped contemporary public opinion on what education is. In K-12 education, of course, the assumption is that competition will force all schools to improve. And the chief tool to drive that competition is standardized tests. The students do well, the teachers did well, accountability is working, so the thinking goes. And this narrative is driven by assigning letter grades to schools and vouchers and every other kind of private enterprise that seems to be fostered by a public entity. But in that kind of system, you'll always have winners and losers. And so, and finally, the system doesn't stop there, and I'll close right here. This corporatization of education works to marginalize teacher education programs, even with an advocacy to eradicate their existence. That is, there are efforts to deprofessionalize what it means to be a teacher, and it's a system that views teachers as functionaries, and therefore that's why there's this fostering of fast-track programs to become a teacher. And that's my critical concern as it relates to higher education and obviously by extension K-12 education.
Good evening. I'm Brian Salvatore from LSU-S. And my wife and I, we've been faculty members at LSU-S now for 12 years. And I've always looked at it as a very fulfilling challenge. Granted, lately it's been more challenging than fulfilling, but that's how we've been being treated by our state. And I don't think the citizens of Louisiana need to treat higher education badly. They just don't see what we're going to produce. We have to show them. So I've always had a great experience educating the young people that have been my students all these years. And 3 weeks ago, when Chancellor Clark called a town hall meeting after the Board of Supervisors meeting was held in Shreveport, I was teaching an afternoon lab that day, but we managed a class so we could go over and attend the town hall meeting together, me with all my students. And we heard all the bad news. We heard how the cut could be as much as 30% of our budget. We couldn't sustain any more than 5%. Students heard it right with me. And I know that not everybody takes that approach with their students, but I took it. It wasn't a big class, it was kind of an experiment. So I took them back to the lab and I asked them. I said, well, what'd you think? What'd you think about that? What are you going to do about it? And as expected, one young man said, I'm going to get the heck out of here. And you know, I communicated and I said, is that what your grandfather said when World War II came? You know, we've all had challenges. Louisiana, I've lived in the South for 19 years. I lived up north for about the other half of my life. And I know that this place is worth saving. I like living here. And we have to communicate that to our students. They don't know. They haven't lived as long as we have. They don't know what other parts of the country are like, what the good aspects are here, what the bad aspects are here. So I told them, I said, the reason you're in college is to acquire knowledge and the ability to communicate and to speak the truth. And you're not kids anymore. You need to partner with us and work with us to help save these institutions of higher education. Believe me, it's worth saving. And they looked and they thought about it. And I'm hoping that that's a path forward. We have to communicate these things to everybody, including our own students. And they are there to help us. They appreciate the opportunities that they get here. But you know, they're just as afraid as the rest of us about the future of higher education. We have to all work together.
Good evening. Let me first thank Dr. Hester for this unique opportunity to join you in hopefully what will be a very meaningful and fruitful dialogue. There's always a challenge when you have this many panelists that not much comes from it. But it's my hope that we will all embrace and understand that no one has a monopoly on ideas. If we are to move forward, and I think you'll understand and appreciate that in essence you're kind of preaching to the choir. But those of us who have been in a choir before, every now and then the choir needs to go to rehearsal. So as Representative Edwards has intimated so passionately, and I encourage you from this point onward, it cannot stop this evening. When we convene on April 13th, and we know that your caseloads are full, you have much to do, research, teaching, writing, and the like. But we need to see you. He mentioned a very good point, and I'm so glad he did. Often, when you are positioned in the legislature, in various committees, you hear all of the wonderful things, all of the challenges that have been met. But rarely do we hear what we're hearing this day. So it is incumbent upon us to be creative for us to be collaborative, and for us to be cooperative. We have to work together as systems, as universities, because at the end of the day, we all want to ensure. I have the good fortune, I often tell them, I sat on Southern's board, so I understand that system, and I represent Grambling State University. And that must always be a Grambling State University. And you're here today to ensure, that all of our higher educational institutions are not only maintained, but also enhanced. So let me thank all of you for what you've done. Let me thank you for the messages that you have sent to the various members of the Louisiana legislature. And let me encourage you to continue, because notwithstanding, all of us in here are bright people. All of us understand the complexity of the challenges that we face. And all of us understand that we are in a solidly conservative red state. But it doesn't mean that we give up. It doesn't mean that, as Preston indicated, hopefully my good friend and colleague, who is a lion every day in the Louisiana legislature, Representative Edwards, will ascend and do those things that he's been called to do. But it doesn't mean that we give up. So I hope that you will continue your effort to dialogue. You have a great delegation here in Shreveport with all of us, encouraging us, letting us know the impact, the effect, the reach, because ultimately, what affects one affects all. We are living in the best of times and the worst of times. But thank you for what you do, and thank you for appreciating that none of us have a monopoly on those ideas. Help us as we move this state forward, and we do what is right, what is just, and that is to ensure that higher education is valued in the state of Louisiana. Thank you.
All right, we're going to go ahead and go into the forum part of our program. We have about 20 some odd questions, so what I'll do, we'll give each speaker a minute and 30, whoever wants to respond for each question. Not everyone has to respond to each question, but there are some hot topic items, and a lot of you might want to jump in. So what we'll do, we'll give a minute 30 for your response. I'll put my hand up at a minute 30. I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to put your mouth. Just go ahead and finish your thoughts so we can move on to the next. We have a lot of ground to cover, and we would like to get to questions from the audience. Everybody ready? All right, let's go ahead and get started. Our first question is, according to the governor's budget, higher education can see $567 million in budget cuts. What can or will the colleges and universities do to survive such cuts? Whoever wants to take the floor first.
I'll start with, from the perspective, frankly, of my university. And so we have been cut so much. Over the last 6 years, we have been cut in terms of state appropriations by $46 million over 6 years. And that's with a system that has a budget of about $129 million now. And so the proposed budget cuts, when you talk about that $567 million, mean a $43 million budget cut to the Southern system. I think the word used earlier was decimation. That would decimate our system. And so from our perspective, in terms of what can be done, it's going to require some maneuvering. I know the governor offered some suggestions in terms of rolling back some of the tax incentives. I think that is something that certainly needs to be considered. It probably should have been considered a long time. And I think we've got to figure out a way, it probably won't happen this session, to protect higher education in the future. We can't respond to higher education like as if it's a hurricane that we knew would never come. Hurricanes come all the time, and we prepare for them because we're in Louisiana, we know what's going to happen. The fact that we don't have a better strategy for protecting higher education, frankly, is disturbing. The other thing that given that I have legislators here on the panel, is that in Southern and Grambling in particular, that their hands are tied in terms of being able to adjust admission standards to be competitive in the education marketplace. But at the same time, we're being cut and cut and cut. And if you want these institutions to survive, you've got to, one, give us some autonomy to do some things. And it can't be false autonomy. It's got to be one where you allow us to compete in the marketplace for students and to help our own budget.
I'd like to add just a little bit to that. The $567 million in cuts is reflective of a single particular tax that makes absolutely no sense, I think, because it pits an industry against another industry. You look at the inventory tax, it collects what they're saying is $372 million, which is going to be a portion that would reduce the $567 million. But what sense does it make to target one particular credit that's out there? It needs to be a more thoughtful, smart process by looking at all of the credits that this state has and taking a different approach by cutting all of them at some particular, in some particular fashion. Credits are normally given to incentivize, and at some point, you've incentivized the business until it just stays here and becomes permanent. We do have to take a look at this because the state just can't afford it. Additionally, I want to touch on what Preston said when he talked about giving some autonomies. In Louisiana, with higher education, the cut has been, the tuition authority that they've given has been held on to by the legislature. The way that the institutions are funded used to be 75-25. It's pretty much the opposite way around. So they're no longer state funded, they are state aided. And so they're gonna have to take a serious look at releasing potentially that tuition authority and allowing those institutions to have the ability to price to market.
And in line with that, we're working, some of us, with pieces of legislation to assist these institutions with the autonomy that Attorney Castille indicated as it relates to out-of-state residents, as well as mission-specific. So we have a long road ahead, but we're trying to craft legislation that will give us an opportunity to give that autonomy some of that flexibility that he indicated.
I'd like to make a point about the question itself. That is the question, what will the universities do to survive? It's an important reality check to remember that in some sense the universities have not survived. If you look at the physical condition of the campuses around the state, it's deplorable. If an OCO officer came through and there were not other government deals going on, probably half the buildings would be shut down. The faculties in most universities would have declined maybe 20-30% in terms of their total numbers, and many institutions that have outside accredited programs are barely on the edge of staying accredited owing to teacher-student ratio and that kind of thing. So then the question comes up, what would happen if by some strange inverse miracle we lost 80% of the funding, or 30%, or even 15%? Well, the universities are not going away. First of all, there's no political will to close down campuses, so that's not going to happen. So what will happen then? We will simply pay for it in a different way. We will increase tuition, or we won't call it tuition, we'll call it a fee and pretend it doesn't require quite so much legislative approval. We'll have what amounts to a regressive tax on the poor, or we'll find some way to recirculate money through TOPS to make up the difference and rob Peter to pay Paul. So I think the question, what will the university do to survive, is that they will, in fact, not suspend their long-term obligations. They will get the money somewhere, and that will run down everything else, whether it be the parents who try to find some way to support their students, or some other government agency. Unless we get some other revenues, we're not going to get money out of a vacuum.
I just want to disagree just a little bit, because there are students at some of these institutions that cannot afford any sort of tuition increase or fee. Some of these students just won't go to college at all. It would lose them forever.
And that's the point I was going to make. There's a lot of talk about tuition authority. The tuition component is not broken. When kids go to college this fall, they're going to pay 90% more in tuition and fees than they paid when Governor General became governor. 90% more. So that component of funding for higher education is not the broken component, and yet that's what we hear coming over and over from the universities and the systems. And we will never, as a legislature, give control of the tuition to the universities if we don't change TOPS first, because you're in effect just handing them the checkbook. So it's a much more complicated story than that. But clearly, it is a tremendous problem. I didn't want to answer the question because I know our universities are not going to survive a cut in the neighborhood of 500 30 million or whatever. I mean, there is no surviving that. And even under the governor's proposal, he is proposing to cut 200 million. And you've got to understand, we've already cut $700 million in state support out of higher education over the last 7 years. Already cut more than the rest of the nation. Nobody else has approached what we've done here in cutting universities and technical colleges. And to add $200 million, which he proposes to do, even if you do everything he's asking you to do, he wants to cut higher education $200 million. That's unacceptable. And we've got to find a way to do better than that.
I like to weigh in on that question as well. Grambling and Southern is in an unusual position as I see it. We start off behind the 8 ball in terms of funding that has been given to these institutions over the years. And of course, at this point in time, with these continued budget cuts, reduction in our student population, it presents a tremendous challenge for us. Just think years ago, Grambling and Southern, we didn't have to compete with neighboring schools. We didn't worry about 19% of our students going to Tech, 19 to 20% going to ULM in Monroe, and of course a non-large number of our students going to LSU and other schools, which again, what it all boils down to from a budgetary standpoint, it's about the numbers. Numbers drive student population, drives a university. And so when those numbers begin to dwindle at Grambling and at Southern, of course, and with a impending budget cut, it presents a tremendous challenge as well. Now, we talk about retention, we talk about recruitment, that we should step up our recruitment, our retention rates should go up. But when budget cuts, when you don't have the fund to provide staffing for those kind of offices, again, you have additional problems. So I think, again, that when I look at higher education across the state of Louisiana, and I look at health care as well, it puzzles me how a great station or a great nation can exist without having higher education at the top of its value and health education as well.
I wanted to weigh in on this as well because about 2 weeks ago, an organization called 24/7 Wall Street ranked the best and worst states in the country for business. And the absolute worst state in the country is Louisiana for 2015. And this is the absolute opposite story of the story of what the governor is telling America as he's spending 165 days out of the year outside of the state. It's just completely wrong based on the criteria which this organization used. And I can just relate to you some of the criteria. Real GDP growth, we're among the worst in the nation. We have fewer patents issued per resident than about 3/4 of the states in the country, and yet we have a lot of industry. We don't have much intellectual property. We have the percentage of adults with bachelor's degrees, we're the 5th worst in the entire nation. And states that are beating us now are Kentucky, West Virginia, Mississippi. I remember when I moved here, the joke was that our state motto was, thank God for Mississippi. Now that Mississippi state motto is, thank God for Louisiana, our state motto is, we just hope we can make it another year. Because we're going year to year, sinking deeper and deeper into this abyss of anti-intellectualism. And I don't know how we're going to recover unless we take a solid stand to this as a state overall.
An opportunity to respond, that one too?
Can I just say one thing on that? Because, and so the burden that we're placing on students, but then the challenge becomes for the legislators is, for an example, in the newspaper, they were interviewing a local state rep, and he had no problem with the tuition increases year after year because we're still not at the southern average or something. So it was justified. So there is a large contingent, I guess, of legislators that have no problem with that. And I think that's part of the challenge.
All right, thank you for that. We'll move on to the next question. It is, what sort of coordination should there be with the higher education system and the pre-K through 12 system in setting goals and benchmarks for student performance and achieving student success? Any takers?
Well, clearly it's important because right now you've got these admission requirements for our four-year universities. And if we don't have K through 12 schools producing kids who are able to meet those admission requirements, then those kids are being required to go to the two-year colleges and technical colleges, which is not a problem in a large sense because a lot of our kids want to go there and probably should go there anyway. But many kids who are not being educated probably really want a four-year degree. They can succeed. We know that they can, but they're having a hard time getting onto the campus. And what we know is that if you make them start at a two-year institution, even if they're successful there for 2 years, very few of them make the transition to a four-year university. And we are not awarding too many bachelor's degrees in Louisiana. We have a lot of problems. That's not one of them. And we're not too well educated. And so there has to be better coordination between the product we're getting out of our K through 12 schools so that we can actually have those kids being admitted into our universities. And I think that that's some of the autonomy that Preston was talking about, is maybe deviating a little bit from what those admission standards are now, so that those kids can have an easier time of getting onto our four-year universities.
Yeah, there's a huge disconnect when you look at in terms of the national ACT average. The national average is 20.9. And so you look at 20.9, but if you look at, particularly for the mission-specific institutions, the HBCUs like Southern and Grambling, that are serving a very, very important population. And if you don't look at that and analyze it and do something about it, you're going to have other problems. So African Americans, for example, make up 12% of this nation's population, but make up 40% of the incarceration rate. That's an issue. But how do you address that? You address that through education. So if you think about African Americans in terms of their ACT score, in terms of the average, it's 16.9. But Southern and Grambling, as four-year institutions, have an ACT requirement of 20. But wait a minute. If you've got an admission requirement that does not allow you to serve your population, the population that needs to be educated. Now, this is not a function of, well, we're trying to lower standards, we're trying to dumb down. What we're seeing is that there's an unserved or an underserved population that if you don't, as a state, invest in them and do something about it, you're going to have problems. I sit as a Baton Rouge City Court judge. I was appointed by the Supreme Court in 2009. And maybe you ever seen Sanford and Son? And you remember when Fred would say, look, I go down to court and all I get is justice, all I see is justice, there's just us. That was kind of my experience, in that you saw lots of brown and black people in the criminal justice system day after day. How do you solve that problem? Educate.
I say something too. So the answer is education, but then the question becomes, what is the purpose of education? As simple as that may sound. And the purpose, of course, is providing opportunity. Education is opportunity. The question we have to ask ourselves in our K-12 schools, are we expanding the opportunity for all our students to tap into their natural curiosities, to tap into their gifts and talents and their potential? I'm not so sure if we're doing that. And I think the bigger issue, there's some issues obviously with K-12 education, but the biggest issue that is challenging K-12 education is poverty and the impact of poverty on our children. And a lot of times we'll send them to schools in a situation to domesticate them through skill and drill, as opposed to providing an opportunity that taps into their natural goodness and their natural potential that they have. And in fact, education could be thwarting that through a system that is dictated, what I earlier mentioned, a corporate way, a market-driven way of how we're viewing our students. The fact of the matter is, K-12 education is objectifying children. And that is what bothers me. And I think that's undermining what is happening in education, that obviously is having an impact in higher ed.
I wanted to share some of my feelings about education in the K through 12 schools. I make no bones about it, I'm not a fan of Common Core. And that's probably the only area where the governor and I see something in common. I think that one of the problems with Common Core education, as we can see by the billboards all around the city here, is that it's everything is test-based. And test-based curriculum is driving the curriculum. The students are not learning for the sake of love and knowledge itself anymore. A few years ago, I started a program in the Caddo Parish Public Schools called Aspire, after-school program for innovation and respect for education. And we had a dedicated class of college students at our university where I would train them, and they would go out into schools and do project-based education. And the goal was to teach students how things work. Students just want to know how things work. How does a battery work? How does a motor work? What's happening in this egg as this embryo is developing, this duck egg, and how does it relate to human development? And things of that sort. How fast is this rocket going to go when we launch it? How can we figure that out? And the thing that I found is not only do the students in the high schools enjoy learning this, but the very college students that I was working with had not even known these things before. They had never really understood how things work. And they came up through the local school system as well. And so it's a little more work to teach that way. You got to set things up. You have to plan things out. You got to clean up things. But this is the sort of thing that really gets students excited. You still have tests, but it shouldn't drive the curriculum.
Let me jump in just for a minute. I think the key is collaboration, as has just been intimated. I remember as a high school student at Arcadia High School, how so many of the professors from Grambling State University would come over and we would be able to go to the campus and learn and have that experience. And it was so instrumental toward my development and toward my drive to want to go on and further my education. Not that perhaps you all need anything else to do, your plates are full, but that is so important. Some of the things that we've done in the legislature, I don't know how much involvement the individuals who are on the ground had the involvement. You know, we're told, and it's kind of what Representative Edwards said, I'm amazed, and we're going to make some changes, but I'm amazed when you look at Common Core, when you look at the letter grades, when you look at other things of that nature, it just sailed on through. But now it's the worst thing inside of, I'm like, well, were you not there listening to the articulations? So at some point, we have to get to a point where we're going to have to take some hard stance and stand up to this administration. And we all know, again, as a new governor will be elected, what have you, probably what's the first thing they're going to do? Education, tackle that again. So it's a hard concept, but if we're continuing looking at education, continuing the dialogue, the conversation, then I think that things will be a little better and the expectations will be there through K-12. They'll understand what they have to teach as they move.
I'd like to make a brief comment following up on something that James and Brian said about opportunity. One purpose of the K-12 requirements is to ensure that students can survive the first 2 years of college, that is, can complete a general education curriculum. And as someone who sits on the General Education Committee for the state, I see time and time again pressure to circumscribe that curriculum. So, for example, on one side of the ledger, the argument comes that mathematics at a given level of difficulty is an obstacle to success for liberal arts students. The converse of that is that fine arts stand in the way of a student who needs to complete an engineering degree in a specific amount of time. The output of all of that ultimately is to erode the presence of certain disciplines in the general education curriculum, and that in turn, through the entrance requirements, sends the message to high school counselors that certain areas of inquiry are not really necessary in order to succeed in college. so you see the decline in fine arts curricula around the state. You see the decline in music programs in a state where music is a major export industry and integral to the supposed cinema emphasis that we have and that we support at such extraordinary tax concessions. So I think one thing that we need to do is something like the STEM disciplines have done collectively nationwide, and that is to begin a program promoting to students at the high school level other careers, other lines of work that you can do, acquainting them with astronomy, acquainting them with sociology and political science, acquainting them with a bachelor's degree in sculpture as a possibility so that there'll be demand for that kind of education in the high schools as well.
Everyone answer that question that one did?
I just want to add something to this because collaboration is great, and you know, it's policy though that hamstrings the educators in the classroom and the teachers. And unless we have policies that promote these types of things, we're not going to move forward. And we have lawmakers that don't push forward the types of policies that we need. And we've got to make changes to that. That's where we have a majority of our challenges in how we set our policy on education in Louisiana. That is not going to change until we begin to hear from you and to hear from you loudly and for you to make the noise that you need to make.
All right, we'll move further to the third question. Some have said the way to plug the budget holes is to roll back some of the tax incentives the state of Louisiana offers. Is that a good solution?
Part of the solution.
Well, the answer is yeah, that is part of the solution. You know, we have done some things in Louisiana that have really set us up to where we were in very dire straits. One of which is over the last several years, we have created about $600 million more expenditures that are tax expenditures, whether you call them tax credits, tax exemptions, deductions, exclusions, rebates, whatever you call them. The taxes are on the books, but we under certain circumstances forgive people from having to pay those taxes. And we do that with the best of intentions. But the problem is that quite often those programs cost more than we ever thought. They give us much smaller benefit than we ever thought. And unlike traditional appropriations, we don't check them every year. And so they continue to grow. And it's time that we put those on the table along with our traditional appropriations such as higher education and healthcare. And I think what Markey was saying earlier is right. Rather than picking a handful of those and trying to scout them, if you put many more on the table, you can give a haircut to all of them and get a much better number on the table to try to mitigate these cuts to higher education and healthcare. And I believe that there's the political will in the legislature. It will be much easier to get folks to reduce tax expenditures than to actually increase revenue. I know we hear about reimposing the steady personal income tax increases. I'm just going to tell you there are not 70 votes in the House to do that. But there should be 70 votes to tackle some of these tax expenditures. And so I think it is not only the smart thing to do, I think it may be the only thing that can be done in a large scale.
You would think, though, that the state of Louisiana would start with the premise that if you value something, that you invest in it. If you value something, you invest in it. And it concerns me greatly, going back to one of the earlier comments, that we're so far behind. And to me, I'm not a legislator, but it's such a simple solution that if you have a much more educated population, and if you desire that, and you will have a better state as a result of it, you will grow your economy, you'll improve the quality of life of all of your citizens, that why would you not start from that premise that we value education because we know the positive results that come from it, or when we start there and say, look, what do we need to do to protect it, to create long-term investments in it, because we can track what the outcomes will be in terms of increases in taxes and revenue as a result of having a more educated population. Perhaps one of the things that we might need in the legislature, no offense, John, who's also a lawyer, is that maybe we should have less lawyers and business folks in the legislature and more educators. Okay? I'm an attorney too, so I'm not big.
I think there's a very poor coordination between what we're incentivizing through our tax credits and tax policy and what we're not taxing in terms of the tremendous wealth that we do have in the state. Now, for example, what are we incentivizing with these tax credits? Well, we've got probably the greatest tax credit in the country for electric cars. Who knew, right? The law was written in some crazy way where it was so vague, and yet it turns out that electric car owners can get up to about a $14,000 tax credit just from Louisiana alone. Even the federal government only pays about $7,500. So where are we making electric cars? We don't make them in Louisiana. Why do we even have such a law? Other states that give massive tax credits, like California, that's where the cars are made. Nevada, setting up a big battery factory. They're given tax credits for a reason, to develop intellectual property, to develop a knowledge-based economy. What's our economy based on here? Casinos in Shreveport. We have oil and gas services about to experience massive layoffs. You can drill frac wells here, not pay any excise tax whatsoever, and we're not taxing the processing of petroleum. We're not taxing the passage of the petroleum and the natural gas through our state. It makes no sense whatsoever. There's no rhyme or reason to the credits or to the lack of taxation on the riches.
Well, I'd like to say, rolling back some of the tax incentives certainly would be helpful. But I think the major issue is, do we value, are we going to value education in our state? You hear from time to time that the reason why education and healthcare gets cut all the time is simply because it's not protected in the state constitution. Now, my thing is that if we are serious about education, serious about healthcare, and I do mean, I know about healthcare, there's an old saying, he who has his health indeed has his plenty, he who has health has everything. And I don't understand, I would say to those in the legislature, if you value education that much, why don't we have a constitutional amendment that will address this? We've been dealing with this for the last, ever since I've been back in the state, last 25 years. And every time a cut occurs, I suppose that there must be some political implications of why the state does not, or why the legislature does not want to do that. But simply, our neighboring state, the state of Texas, has in its constitution education, where education is protected. And I don't see, if we value, like someone said here, my colleague, why don't we do what we have to do to make sure that those children, those coming behind those, they have a chance at becoming all that they can become by providing with the one thing that can make that happen, and that's education.
All right, moving on. It seems that every year there is legislation introduced to merge some of the universities. State Representative Connick has said that he intends to introduce legislation this session to merge SUNO and UNO. Some have said that we should merge Louisiana Tech and ULM or Gremlin. Is a merger something we should consider this legislation?
I would say, when you talk about merging, who is merging with who? When I look at the issue of saying merging, Grambling with Louisiana Tech, I've heard this for too many four-year colleges alone, I-20. But there is a need for Grambling. There's a need for Southern University. Here we have a situation where 70%, I'm told, of African-American students are attending predominantly white institutions. But yet, when we talk about graduation rates, we see that 70% of those, or 75% of those who graduate, they graduate from an HBCU across the nation. So the question becomes, is there the relevancy of an HBCU? I think what has to happen, the state has to provide the resources to make Grambling and Southern truly what they ought to and what they can become. We are behind the 8 ball. If you look through history, historically, Grambling and Southern had to force this state back during the 70s to provide just what I would call a sampling of resources to make them to be able to fit. We had to have a consent decree. State of Louisiana, federal government forced the state of Louisiana to give Grambling State University money to bring its resources, management, facilities, and so forth up to par. But really, we have never been fully funded and fully, provided the resources we need to make us whole. Anyway, I'm opposed to that idea because there's a need for Grambling.
I think I'd like to go on a bit of a limb here and point out that since 2008, I believe, since the Law Work Commission, I've appeared downtown at the legislature for one reason or another to testify in, I think, no less than 5 or 6 blue ribbon panels of different sorts on this topic of merging institutions or restructuring higher education or creating a super board or praying to Superman to save us or one thing or the other. So far, nothing has happened. Nothing. All of those commissions, all of those panels have come to their respective conclusions. They've made recommendations, certainly, but no institutions have been merged. And there's a reason for that. As Herbert has said, the institutions around the state were founded for a reason. There was a reason that La Tech was founded. That reason hasn't really gone away. There was a reason that Southern, both here in Shreveport and Baton Rouge, were founded. Now, those reasons have not gone away. Before we start making these macroscopic changes, which are very expensive to do and which usually don't really save any money, you can look in the AAUP literature and see no evidence that these consolidations ever save any money. We need to look at where the problem is, and that's in the management boards. The management boards, which are the blockade going both ways, from the ground up, the faculty and administration, to the governor, and from the governor coming back down, the management boards do not require any kind of qualification. Have such qualifications as having started a chicken wing chain, or perhaps having done a few chiropractic adjustments, or whatever. That's how you get on a management board in Louisiana. I would submit the first thing that we could do that would be minimally expensive is simply to say, in order to be on the management board, you need to evidence that you are at least an educated person of some sort.
You know, we've seen a previous effort in the last term of the legislature to merge Southern University of New Orleans with the University of New Orleans. That was a merger that I opposed because it's not really a merger. What happens is SUNO goes away, and you no longer have an HBCU in New Orleans, a public HBCU in New Orleans. I don't know of any respectable vision for the future of Louisiana that says you have no public HBCU in New Orleans. The biggest problem we have in New Orleans and around the state is not enough kids getting 4-year degrees. And in New Orleans, it's particularly true among African Americans and particularly among African American men. So how do you solve that problem by closing the institution that is awarding more bachelor's degrees to African American men than any other in the city? You don't solve that problem, you make it worse. And so this merger idea is not a good one, and we shouldn't go down that road. We should also remember that when we look at comparisons between Louisiana and other states, the number of 4-year universities that they have, and quite often they'll tell you, well, look at how many we have in Louisiana compared to Florida. Well, what you don't understand and what they don't tell you is every other county in Florida has a branch campus of their universities. And so, and you only save money by closing a university if you assume that you're not going to educate those kids somewhere else. And when you close a university, you have all the debt associated with those buildings that still has to be paid. So it is not a real way forward. There may be some things that should be done with the management boards, but the universities themselves are going to stick around, and we need to make sure that we're funding them adequately.
Ms. Pierre, Representative Edwards is correct. We went through this challenge several years ago with the SUNO-UNO fight and battle, and we worked together on that. Mergers, when they begin to talk about that, they tend to think that there's going to be some sense of savings. And I suggest to you there are several questions that need to be asked. Does it really save any dollars with all the legacy costs for maintenance of the buildings that you still have that are there? How does it improve program and offerings? You talk about graduation, but you don't fund the current institutions to the level that they need to be funded so that you can graduate a student within 4 years, and then you want to penalize the institutions for not graduating them the way they graduated. The problem still is a structural issue in funding higher education, and mergers are just not, it's not an option, I believe, in this legislative body.
I will tell you, I guess I have some mixed emotion about that. I think UNO might make a really good addition to the Southern prison system.
Yes, I wanted to say something about that we allow universities to cannibalize one another here in the state. And what I mean is that when one university wants to develop a program, they have to justify that to every other school in the state. Even though their own metropolitan area greatly needs this program, some school, 70, 90, 150 miles away, is going to raise an objection to it. And I don't understand that, because no other place, and I've lived in a total of 6 states, no other place I've lived has behaved like that. We do not have too many universities in the state. We're not using them properly. We're not allowing certain ones to develop strengths in this area and then let another one 100 miles away develop a strength in a comparable area. For example, why can't Shreveport have an engineering program? Just because Louisiana Tech has engineering and it's 70 miles away, they're great at micromanufacturing. Why can't we have a petroleum engineering, which we're trying to get off the ground? Why can't we give them the resources to make that world class? This is Louisiana. Why can't we have an environmental engineering program? I know firsthand that we need that. Why can't we have an electrical engineering program? Okay? We're not going to step on anybody's toes if we develop our own strengths. But having no engineering in this area makes Shreveport one of the most undeveloped metropolitan areas in the country. Even Pensacola, Florida is above us in higher education.
Lastly, again, I just want to be practical when we look at these various issues. This august body of intellectuals, pull together the resources and meet with the leadership, target those legislators, their views and what have you. During this time, Representative Burrell and Edwards will tell you we get requests to meet with so many different groups to discuss different things, to dialogue. But at the end of the day, it goes back to securing the amount of votes needed to move positive legislation through. So we're going to have to be practical when it comes to how do we get to that point. How do we, it's just like in your various classes or what have you. When a student comes to you and they try to convince you to give them another chance or to convince you to give them another opportunity, that's where we are with many of our colleagues. We have to convince them that this is the highest priority. We have to change the mindset as we go forward. Now, one good thing about it, but it's still a huge challenge, this is an election year. So a lot of people are amenable, but we have to continue, we have to establish a consistent dialogue where we are consistently talking to these different legislators, letting them know our needs, letting them know the impact, letting them know the challenges so that we can affect that. So I think we've got to be strategic. We have to ensure that we come and testify, that we're seen. I think that's important. Got to be practical.
What services will be lost in healthcare in light of the budget deficit?
Again, we've got an executive budget proposal on the table that even if we do everything that we've been asked to do, and hopefully we're going to surpass that and do a lot more, there's over $300 million in cuts to healthcare in Louisiana. We are funding, for example, the LSU private partner hospitals with about $40 million less than they have requested and say that they need in order to perform their mission next year. That's especially acute in New Orleans at $88 million at the hospital there that they're short, and they're trying to open that brand new hospital that cost $1 billion to build. But it's also a problem here right in Shreveport, because I think it's 23 or 24 million dollars short from what they need to do their mission. So we're talking tremendous cuts in healthcare as well as higher education. Cuts that we can ill afford, cuts that our people really can ill afford. We would stop giving waivers to people so that developmentally disabled folks can get services in their homes. It's just it's a parade of horribles, to be honest with you, which is why I'm somewhat optimistic that we are going to see the light, and create a sense of urgency that we are going to rally around different proposals to mitigate these cuts and reduce them to the maximum extent possible.
I'd just like to add a little bit to that, because there's another component, especially here in Shreveport with our Shreveport Medical School. Because as we know, Regents doesn't fund the medical student to the level that they should. It usually costs roughly between $80,000 and $90,000 to educate a medical student. Louisiana funds them to the tune of a little over $38,000 per student. And so we've got to make up the difference there at the med school. Creating a stable source of funding and stabilization of the funding for the med school here in our area is imperative and extremely important as we seek out accreditation. It's really, really a concern for us. You know, across the country there are 134 roughly accredited institutions. In Louisiana, we have 2 accredited medical schools, public accredited medical schools. And so making sure and ensuring that this administration, as well as the members of the legislature who will take hold of the budget when they come into session on April the 13th, stabilizes that particular funding for the med school, which is a component of healthcare, because we train 70% of our doctors here that stay here in the state of Louisiana, and that stay here specifically in Northwest Louisiana. And we can't lose it, especially with declining admissions for those patients that are coming with Medicaid, and with our retiring population of doctors that are leaving. It is a true challenge that we have in the state that we need to bring up during the legislative session, and how important it is.
All right, moving on to the next question. Has the privatization of the charity hospital system been a good thing for LSU? It's a 2-part question. And has it been a good thing for the Louisiana citizens?
The truth is the jury is still out, because we don't have the information that we need to compare and contrast what the situation was before and after these private partners came online. And we cannot, as legislators, through the fiscal staff, get the numbers to know, for example, whether we're spending more money or less money than we were before. And so we don't really know. At this point, though, I think we're obligated to make it work, because in a real practical sense, we're not going to stand back up our charity hospitals and hire all those state workers back, because the cost of doing that is just going to be prohibitive. So I think we owe it to our people to make this system work. And this is coming from someone who was against the privatization to begin with. My mother was a registered nurse for 30 years at our local charity hospital, and my supper table conversation was always about the services that she had provided to people that day who didn't have insurance. And so that informed my belief system about how important this is. So we've got to make it work, but we don't know yet whether it's been a good thing for, I don't know how you can say it's a good thing for LSU when there's only one hospital that they continue to operate. Whether it's been a good thing for the state, it's hard for me to say that it has, but it's the system we have, and we have to make it work. It's not working as well as it should right now, as evidenced by the fact that we've spent $1.1 billion building a hospital, and right now they're short $88 million of what they're going to need to operate.
I don't think it's been a good thing. I thought that we could have improved some of the efficiency under the charity system, and it could have been made to run. Shreveport's hospital was running profitably. What we're facing now in New Orleans is we have a state where they may hold the grand opening and the bankruptcy proceedings on the same day. I think anytime you bring business into the situation, you have a profit margin there that you have to satisfy. Now, before that was the case, we had inefficiency. I think the inefficiencies could have been eliminated and balanced out, and we didn't have to give up the assets that we had.
Just a general word about the mantra of privatization. That's very popular also among the various members of our management board. But where is the evidence that privatization has accomplished all the wonders that are credited to it? The United States Post Office is semi-privatized, but that has not gotten us very far. The point that I'm making here is that when an institution is privatized, it represents usually one of two possibilities. Either the people don't care to do something as a public entity, or they can't do it. I don't think the latter is the case. People in Louisiana are talented as people are every place else. There's been a decision made somewhere that the poor or the ill are not a public responsibility. That's something that I think merits examination.
Privatization hasn't eliminated underperforming schools either.
All right, so Louisiana faces a $1.6 billion shortfall for the fiscal year 2015-2016. What options should Governor Jindal and legislators pursue to close this budget deficit?
Well, I will demonstrate one of the problems that we have. In addition to the tax incentives that we've already talked about, one of the proposals that came from the governor's office last Friday was he wants to increase funding for higher education, and he wants to do it through a tobacco tax increase of somewhere around $100 billion. But in order for him to approve that arrangement, he's calling on the legislature to create a new fee on our students called an excellence fee and a new tax credit, so that somebody outside of Louisiana might put their blessing on this arrangement and say that he hasn't violated the pledge that he made to Grover Norquist to never raise a tax. Well, that is just a crazy arrangement. If you want a tobacco tax to be increased to pay for higher ed, just do it. But to create a new fee on our kids, and by the way, the tax credit to get the fee back, that doesn't work because our kids borrowing money don't have a tax liability. How are they going to get a tax credit and get their taxes back? Or if their parents are paying and they're from out of state, they don't have a tax liability in the state of Louisiana either. It is a crazy arrangement, and it's the sort of things that we have to deal with in Baton Rouge that just make no sense. We can do better, but we have to apply some common sense to these problems too.
One of the things that I recall in one of our meetings, Kevin, in Alexandria, we had the state treasurer to come and to talk to us about a plan that he had for reducing some of the costs. And of course, he talked about, if you recall, Kevin, he talked about eliminating some of those contracts. And I think he identified about $500 million if we were to eliminate some of those contracts. One, maybe for a contract for the study of a love life of a mosquito. I mean, come on. So, seriously. But I think that that's something, as I recall, last session, it did get through the House and it got through the Senate, as I recall. I'm not sure, did the governor sign that? I don't think so, huh? Veto. But why, that, I was impressed. I thought that certainly would have been a great way and at least a step to solving our problem. Perhaps we can go back, I know, to override the governor's veto is like, going to the moon, but in the environment in which we are in. But I thought that was a good way, and perhaps maybe we ought to look at maybe business out of the game. I mean, some of these contracts, just, when he gave us the list of contracts for things that's going out in the state, it's mind-boggling. It just don't make sense.
one of the challenges we're going to have this session, though, is that the higher education community, relatively speaking, is fairly small when you look around this room, and it's so important that all of our legislators hear from us. What has been great is that you got all college, university presidents on the same page. The alumni associations are working together. The faculty senates are working together. But it's about to get real interesting, and those decisions are going to have to be made over the session in terms of whether tax incentives are going to be rolled back, whether we're going to get $560 million in cuts to higher education, whether half of the people in this room will lose their jobs. All those things will be very, very important to us. And it's going to be critical that we have a strategy, that we let people know that we're out there, because, I will tell you from the Southern alumni perspective, we sent hundreds of letters from around the country. And the LSU alumni, the Southern alumni, the UL, are getting together. And I heard in Christy Nichols' report to the joint budget, a lot of those phrases and buzzwords and the messaging that we're getting out there. So I guess what I would say is that, yeah, we should consider tax incentives and all those other things, but it's so important that the legislators, and we're kind of railing on Governor Jindal right now, but the legislature now has it now, and they're going to have to make some decisions, and they're going to need to hear from all of us often and very loudly.
There was something that the state's economist Albrecht said recently that caught my attention, and they're telling us the budget deficit for next year is $1.6 billion. But one of the things they're basing that on is oil at $70 a barrel. Well, oil's around $51 a barrel, so that's almost a $20 difference from the truth. And at $12 million per dollar of difference in the price of oil, that means that the deficit for next year is actually going to be about $1.85 billion, not $1.6 billion. And this is the standard operating procedure for this government. They come by, they tell you the bad news, and they cut the heck out of the budget, and then they tell you the real story during the mid-year cut of the following year. And just when they cut everything to the bone, then they cut you again. And I have no doubt that's going to happen again, because the price of oil is not going to go up to 70 when the world as a whole is producing almost 2 million barrels a day more than it's using. Every day, the glut of oil is growing by 2 million barrels a day. And the only way that's going to decrease is if there are further layoffs in the industry. So we're going to get hit there, or we're going to get hit by a further price decline. We really can't win in the oil market right now. And with regards to this program of the excellence fees, it's actually, the name has been changed as of yesterday. They're no longer calling them excellence fees. They call them the SAVE program. It stands for State Adjustment for Valuable Education. So the other program didn't sound good, so they do acronym.
Okay, moving on to the next question. Since the adoption of the Constitution in 1974, the two biggest areas that have not been protected from across-the-board budget cuts in lean times are higher education and health and hospitals. What should be done about that? All right, well, it is 7:30. We would like to extend the question or the Q&A of our panelists to the audience. Does anybody want to start with a question? If you want to step to that podium right there.
I'd just like to thank everyone for making this possible today. Is it on? Yeah. Thank you all, and may God bless you and may keep you. My question is, and if I was going to preach this evening, my subject would be, who will take the burden to Baton Rouge? We're talking about this, and then we say, call the legislators and tell them. It's kind of like they don't know yet that we're in this crisis. Like, we're the only folk know, and I think that they ought to know. We elected them to go there. Whereas I know that the art of politics is who gets what, when, where, and how. And so we have not raised taxes, but we've raised every fee that's possible. I mean, I have to give the governor credit. He said that he would not raise taxes, so he's held it. But every fee that you could dream of has been raised, and he just gave us another example of another fee. So how did we get to where we are? And my next question would be, who made the governor mad to punish higher education? I know with the school system, they could retire at one time and then they could come back and work for the school system. But one lady made him mad, and they did some legislation and punished the teachers. So how important will important be? We talking about higher education is important. How important will it be in this session? And the next thing is, who will stand up to the governor or whoever when we know that this state has line item veto? We know that every elected official have special projects. So who will be brave enough to stand up to say enough is enough? Who will make a stand? We don't have a vote, and the question is, will we have a voice? So therefore, we elect people to go to Baton Rouge, and then now those people are saying, call us and tell us what y'all want. I mean, it's like, won't nobody tell them in Baton Rouge, so what do we do?
I'd like to suggest that we have something of a methodological problem. Under the Grad Act, the emphasis in every administration is on the retention and the graduation of students. And as a result, no matter how serious the crisis, the university administrations will, of necessity, it's not a wicked impulse, do everything to convince the students that it's going to be okay, that some provision will be made, that recreational facilities will be provided. At LSU, we were supposed to build a swimming pool in the shape of LSU. The bid came in too high, so apparently we're going to drop one of the letters, but there's some other students.
That's you. That's you.
So I think one thing we have to do is stop this rhetoric of niceness and let the students and their parents, who are more numerous than we are, know that bad things are going to happen. And another way that you can do that, if you're a faculty member out there, faculty members are by and large too nice and go along with this program of retention and graduation. I hear stories all the time. Somebody came to my office the other day and told me on the QT, the administration has asked me to take on 9 students in one class as an independent study to hide the fact that they can't give that course owing to lack of money. You as a faculty member have some rights. You've got a job description, you've got a specified workload, and you can say, no, I'm not going to do that, and those students are going to have to suffer. Now, there'll be some who say that's going to run the institution down because the students will go elsewhere. But at some point, I think we have to draw the line and let it be known that this economic behavior and the voting behavior of the students and their parents has consequences.
Can I speak I want to speak to the issue of who made the governor mad. I will tell you that when the governor was running for office, I had so much hope, and I'm not picking on the governor too much, but when he was running for office, I thought, we've got a guy with an Ivy League education, went to Baton Rouge High, one of the best high schools in Baton Rouge. He's a Rhodes Scholar. I met him, looked at him, he's a little darker complexion than me. I thought, this is going to be someone who can empathize with everybody in the state of Louisiana. But I think from the perspective of priority, someone got to him and convinced him that this wasn't the most important thing on the agenda in terms of how to invest in higher education. And that is, and I know you asked the question sort of tongue-in-cheek, but it's a function of what's a person's priority. And for politicians, if I dare say, is that if constituents speak loudly enough on a particular issue, public service, speak loudly enough on a particular issue, people pay attention. And it's going to be about votes and people who care and make their voices heard. So it's so critical, as I look around this room, that if we just leave here tonight and go home and say, oh, that was okay. We had a good time. They said some good things, and don't do anything about it. We will be failing the state. We will be failing ourselves in the worst possible way. So we have to go. We need to go to sualumni.org and find out more information of how to make our voices. It's at LSU-alumni.org. Go to the Board of Regents website. Find out the names and addresses of all the legislators and let them hear from us.
And Pastor Green, I'm a legislator. I take the challenge personally. I promise you, I will stand up to the governor. I know that Patrick Jefferson and whoever else will too. The difficulty is, in order to do something constructive, you've got to have 70 votes out of 105 to do any of the things that we've talked about tonight. And so it's a lot more than just the three of us, but it's not just wanting to do something, it's 70 people agreeing on a specific thing to do. And that requires a lot of pressure from the outside. It shouldn't, but it does. And when we need for the alumni for our universities to be involved to raise money for a foundation or to raise money for an athletic association, they get called upon. They need to energize the alumni around the state of Louisiana and really around the country for our universities in a way that they have never been energized before. Because I can tell you it makes a real difference when a legislator is getting called from people who live in his or her district and they're all singing off the same hymn. It makes a real difference, and we do need that help. And perhaps we shouldn't need help, but we do need that help in order to arrive at consensus.
And being a Baptist preacher, in my closing, would somebody just give the governor a message that my granddaddy said romance without finance ain't no fun?
Do we have another question from the audience? All right, we do have some more forum questions than one for on that.
As Philip is coming, Dr. Rosen is coming, I really do want to just add to what Preston was saying when we talk about collectively getting together and contacting your legislators. There is strength in numbers, and you can make a difference, but it has to be a collective effort with a collective message, and it doesn't need to be, just a form letter that you're going to send down there. You're going to have to make the calls. You're going to have to travel to Baton Rouge. You're going to have to stand there and knock on the door of your own legislator if that's what it takes. If this is important to you, I've seen it happen before. You can't sit idly by and just attend forums. You have to show up, and you have to make the noise in order to make a difference.
I agree with Markey totally on that. We do have to go from Shreveport to Baton Rouge and talk to people in Baton Rouge. And beyond that, remember that all of our legislators are here on Friday generally. And so make an office appointment, go talk to them, let them know how you feel. I mean, that's, I think, part of a representative democracy. Very, very agree with that. I just want to go back to the last question before we went to the other questions that I didn't hear any response to, which is this issue of the structure of the budget. Because fundamentally, I think where we are right now and how we've gotten to where we are is how we have somehow structured the budget over time in the state of Louisiana, where every time there's a budget cut, it has to be with healthcare and higher education. I've not been to a whole lot of community efforts by the sheriffs to talk about how bad the jail system is, and I haven't had a whole lot of community efforts from pre-K through 12. It's higher education that's being cut so drastically, and it's very, very difficult in looking at this realistically and saying, how do we really get ourselves out of this unless we structurally start talking about how we change the budget and the structure of the budget in the state of Louisiana. So I'd like to get back to that and just leave that last question. What was that question? The last one before?
What services will be lost in healthcare in light of the budget deficit?
No, one before that.
Louisiana, the $1.6 billion budget shortfall?
I think, Philip, you're speaking to the issue of, we have a $24 billion budget, and only about, a small percentage of that, which encompasses healthcare and higher ed, that can be cut because it's the only discretionary part of the budget. The real problem is because we have constitutionally protected the majority of the budget, and the only things that aren't constitutionally protected are healthcare and higher ed, correct?
That's correct.
And so, when you talk about constitutional protections, we've done a little something with healthcare in this last election where they have done some constitutional protections with healthcare. However, higher ed is sitting out there all by itself. Now, this requires a constitutional amendment or a constitutional convention, which there has not been in this administration, a political will in order to move it forward. We've had many instruments that have been filed. The real challenge is getting someone behind it, whether it's a full-blown out constitutional convention and then you open up everything and everything's on the table, or some limited form of that. That's a real challenge. That's a discussion that you're going to have with the members of the legislature before you're going to move forward with it, because it is a Pandora's box when you begin to open up this bill, or this constitution, to talk about how we fund things. But if it is important, and it is a priority, something will be done, but you got to hold their feet to the fire.
Well, let me just, short of a constitutional convention, and I know you've thought about this a great deal, Patrick, I know you have too, and Roy has. Is there any way that we can fundamentally talk about restructuring the budget short of a constitutional convention? Or is that the only way?
No, you could do a constitutional amendment that would get two-thirds, it'd have to get two-thirds vote in the House and the Senate and then be approved by the voters. Now, just being realistic, practical, you can't do a constitutional amendment to protect higher ed, because when you do have a budget downturn and a revenue downturn like we have right now, you've got to be able to cut something. So the constitutional amendment is going to have to unprotect things that are protected. And that's what makes it so hard, but that's what you have to do, because Markey's point is exactly right. We've got a $25 billion budget, we've got about $9 billion to the state general fund. Of that, only 2.8 is discretionary, 2.8 billion. 80% of the 2.8 billion is healthcare and higher ed. And so when we have big cuts, 80% of the cuts get allocated to healthcare and higher ed, and it happens year after year. So the answer is a constitutional amendment that doesn't protect higher ed, but it unprotects a bigger part of the budget, so that when you do have the need to cut, you're not focusing those cuts only on higher ed and healthcare.
Can I ask a follow-up question to your question to the panel? And that's, I remember during the Governor Foster's administration, that the big sell for why we should have gaming in Louisiana is that there was going to be some tie to education, our education, and this was going to be the panacea so that we would not have this discussion in 2015. And frankly, I don't remember what happened, because we're here in 2015 and we're having this discussion, and I might go to the casino after tonight, but I don't know that that's going to really help our problem with our education. You all remember what happened?
Well, I know exactly what happened. The problem is money is fungible. And so the money for the gaming, we don't gamble, the money from that really is going to education, but it's supplanted money that was already going there, so you haven't seen the net increase. And we do that with everything. The tuition increases that our kids have been paying in colleges has only supplanted the general fund dollars that actually have been reduced by an amount that exceeds the tuition increase. And so when the pastor said that we haven't been taxing, we have been taxing our kids on their dreams, because they are paying more for college, and the college is spending less to educate them. And so we're removing tuition dollars, and we're paving roads, and we're giving health care, and we're housing inmates with that. So we absolutely have taxed our kids. But what Preston is saying is exactly right. Everybody thought that gaming proceeds was going to cure the problem. That only is the case if you maintain a stable baseline of funding and you don't supplant the funding. We have supplanted the funding, so there's not a net revenue increase for education.
But fundamentally, I think, from the way I can understand it, we had a big balloon in a budget based on after Katrina. And then everyone started to spend more money in every agency. But then when we got to the point where we were getting down to reality, it seems that only healthcare and higher ed, and they got completely crushed because the other agencies already have money. So the idea that you just postulated, I think is an idea worth discussion, in the future, whether you're as governor or the next governor, it's a discussion item that maybe should be had.
Yeah, and I don't want y'all to think it's only higher ed and healthcare. The Department of Agriculture and Forestry was getting $55 million in state general fund in 2008. It's going to get $21 billion. Okay, so that's the single biggest state agency that has been cut. We have done things with the Department of Corrections, we've cut the Lieutenant Governor's Office, and Cultural Recreation and Tourism, the Secretary of State's office. There are lots of cuts being made out there, but you could add them all up, and they don't approach what we're doing to higher ed. But as a percentage of their budgets, they are big cuts, and you're going to see the effect of that around Louisiana as well.
Final question for the audience? Go ahead.
Just very briefly, I think it's time to get rid of the GRAD Act. The GRAD Act introduces into higher education a lot of the same foolishness that we see in K-12. The so-called market principles where they are not appropriate. By judging institutions by so-called graduation rates as if that is somehow a measure of the effectiveness of the institution. I think that would be a one hopeful thing among some of the other things that have already been discussed. But I think the GRAD Act is a bad idea, it's bad policy. It actually encourages universities to focus on just getting folks out rather than actually graduating them. It gives a lot of very perverse incentives, and you need to get rid of it. What the problem is, it doesn't offer really any incentives because it's really become sort of this penalty. A lot of the institutions, the regional institutions, and not just HBCUs, but regional institutions, they hate it. I heard a presentation by the Board of Regents last Monday, and there aren't very many, maybe there aren't very many fans of the GRAD Act because it really hasn't worked the way it was intended. And that is, it doesn't provide incentives. And the GRAD Act granting resources and autonomies for diplomas, those resources, we're here today talking about the lack of resources. So clearly, the resources that we thought might come from the higher education perspective, they hadn't come, it hadn't worked, it's penalized institutions. It has really not worked the way I think the legislature and perhaps the governor thought at the time. And if not repealing it, certainly revamping it considerably is something that the legislature needs to strongly consider this session.
I think most faculty would agree with you, Albert. For one, the GRAD Act rewards institutions with the means to meet the goals after the goals have been met, which makes no sense. For two, of course, it punishes institutions that reach out to the people who need the education the most, the adult populations, the non-traditional populations, those who are attempting to improve their career at midlife, those who are transferring between institutions. Most of these don't count the numbers for one reason or another. And third, the GRAD Act actually, I believe, impairs the advancement of graduate education by putting so much emphasis on the baccalaureate degree. It distracts institutions that might want to explore master's degrees, including Masters of Arts and Teaching degrees, and PhDs.
We have a question?
Hi, my name is Johnette Magner. I'm the Executive Director of the Shreveport-Bossier Business Alliance for Higher Education. And one of the things that I would like to emphasize tonight is that as I talk with chancellors throughout the region, one of the things that they tell me is their big fear is that we're going to see a cut of about $200 million and say, wow, weren't we lucky that it wasn't $500 million, when in fact $200 million is a disaster. So the message that we want to take to Baton Rouge, and especially to you all in the legislature, is that we can't afford any more cuts at all. And it's really important that you restore all of the funding to higher education that Governor Jindal cut out his budget. Also, my organization has started a website, and we have an online petition that people can go and sign, and it asks the legislature to restore all of that funding. It's SaveLAFuture.org. Those of you who have cell phones with you right now, go to the internet. All you have to do is sign your first name, your last name, and give us your email. It's SaveLAFuture.org. We'll be giving it to the legislature the first day of the session. Thank you.
Just want to make a few comments if I could, ask the panelists for a reaction. I think this event's been a good event, that it's raised a lot of issues, but I really have the feeling we've been scratching the surface, that we haven't really addressed a lot of the underlying profound fundamental issues, and that there's not going to be a remedy for this situation until we get a better diagnosis. And I don't think people are really addressing the underlying problems. We're going from crisis to crisis. You know, ever since 2008, now it's 2015. And we're looking forward to the next crisis in 2016. We're always on the defensive. We need to take the offensive. What's happening in Louisiana is profoundly wrong. It's profoundly unethical. It's profoundly irrational. A lot of it is discriminatory against minorities, against black people, against working class whites. It's discriminatory against the poor people of Louisiana. A lot of it, it's hard to see as anything other than sabotage. Systematically undermining public education is itself something more fundamental. It's not just happening here with this nonsense, superficial nonsense of workforce development. That's training, that's not education. It's happening here, it's happening in Wisconsin, with the attacks on the University of Wisconsin. The same ideology, the same silliness, the same toxic sludge. So that this stuff is not intellectually honest. We have to challenge the underlying, not just the budget, and not just the policy, but the ideology behind the policy, the philosophy behind the policy. It's profoundly anti-democratic. We're not going to be able to preserve a healthy, functioning democracy if we undermine education. It's going to make way for demagoguery. It's going to mean we either educate or we're going to have to incarcerate. Louisiana already has the national record for incarceration per capita. It has one of the worst records for education. It's ultimately part of the legacy of slavery. All the slave states in the Deep South are in trouble like that. Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas have the worst standardized test scores in the nation. There's nothing wrong with the people. There's a hell of a lot wrong with the school system. And privatization is not going to cure it, it's going to make it worse. Privatization is going to stratify opportunity. It's going to make it worse. There's been an abandonment of the responsibility of the state to educate the population. And it's getting progressively worse. So that we really need to have more meetings like this. We need to have more discussion and more interaction. Somebody said the hardest thing in politics is figure out what do you do next. And I think that part of the answer is that we're going to understand the problem better. And it's a lot deeper than has been really addressed so far. Anyway, any comments?
I'd like to make a comment. And that was very well stated in what you said. Part of the problem is to recognize that there is a problem. And what you're talking about, a lot of us don't even recognize that the system, the ideology is the problem that is fostering this privatization, that is alienating children, mostly children of color, and it's the system that is doing it. And that is a deeper conversation. And that is where we have to make some changes, because if we don't make changes there, you're 100% correct. We're going to keep going down the same old road, kicking that can down the road unless we change it. So you said it, right on.
You know, my colleague and Grambling, I always appreciate you being forthright with his opinions about things, and most times you is on cue. But I think really, when it's all said and done, I think we know what the problems are, but do we have the will and the commitment to solve it? I think that's what that, you know, we've been dealing with this question of last 5 years.
No, you can finish your thought. Now, Lord, and then we'll have to wrap up.
We've been dealing with declining enrollments, other universities outside of Louisiana attracting our students, particularly when it comes to HBCUs, Grambling and Southern. And I've often said that a big part of our problem has been state action. State action, in the sense that in the years gone by, when we could not, the African Americans could not find jobs in Louisiana, we had to go out of state. And over the years, we wanted to send our kids back to Louisiana. Out-of-state tuition was so absorbent. I think we've done a little bit about that. But there was really little commitment, I want to say, to saving Grambling and saving and giving these schools what they need. I'm sure that's another discussion we can have at some point in time, but I do want to conclude by saying this. If we don't, and I say to our legislators, if we don't get it right this time, if we don't do what is right and what is just, what is fair, I fear and I weep for higher education in Louisiana. Maybe if we don't, perhaps we may not be gathered, Kevin, in a session like this next year. But hopefully the legislators would do what is right, as I said, and to really provide great opportunities for our kids to be educated here in Louisiana. It can be done. Just grab the wheel to get it done.
Dr. Salvatore?
Yes. Hugh, I was happy to see you. I didn't see you behind that post. You're always right on target. Had I seen you in the beginning, I would have given up this seat to you because nobody says it better than you. But what you're really saying there is dead on, because we're forced to be reactionaries, we do not have the opportunity to be visionaries. And I think that's on purpose. When we're kicked over the edge of the mountain and we're tumbling down that cliff head over heels, how can we think about tomorrow? We're thinking about our very survival. And somehow we got to change that dynamic.
All right. Unfortunately, this conversation could last, and it should continue in your homes and in your groups, but we have come to the end of the conclusion of our program, and we're going to allow 30 seconds for a wrap up. 30 seconds, I'll put my hand up, and my timer will go off. 30 seconds for a wrap up, and again, we have a reception downstairs, and we can continue the conversation there if you'd like. Please.
Well, I'm also always inspired by you, and I would suggest that what ultimately this ideology about is two things. One is conformity and the other is obedience, or to put it another way, to turn the university into an obedience school. There's no way that one individual person alone can solve that problem, but there are some things you can do. You can make connections with the press, for example. We have somebody from the press right here today, and you can encourage the members of the press to pay attention to the right parts of the story, not just the sensational parts. Hugh Wilson stood up and delivered an oration, but instead, Hugh Wilson said, we need to move from obedience to success.
I'm just thankful to see all of you here tonight. It says something about your commitment to brave the weather, to get out here in the cold weather, come tonight. I hope that when you leave here tonight, this won't be the end of this discussion, that as you go back to your respective locales, that you'll continue to fight for higher education.
I too am thankful that you are here and this dialogue has begun. The proposal that the governor, and this is a part of it, has put forth is just that. It's a proposal. And I believe it's a Band-Aid. And with this particular proposal, I think that we'll find ourselves in 6 months after that's passed, asking for some additional assistance because we're going to see a mid-year cut with this. I am encouraged that this particular legislature will stand up and have a voice of their own as an individual body and develop more sustainable solutions. But they can't do it without you. So don't let this dialogue and this conversation end today.
I want to say thank you to the Southern University administration, Professor Hester, all of your hard work in getting this together. It's phenomenal to bring folks together to have this sort of conversation. So thank you very much. This can't be the end of the discussion, though. It's so important that we continue what you talked about, Hugh, and take that conversation to the next level. If it is a deeper discussion, we should have that discussion. But it can't just be an academic discussion. We've got to actually do something, take action, form a plan, and do something. Thank you very much.
Dr. Hester and Dr. Belton, all of you, thank you very much for being here. The panelists, I've learned so much from all of you tonight. The bottom line for me is we cannot fix our problems if we keep elected leaders with the same core philosophy and ideology who are calling the shots today. You know, that is the definition of insanity. We need to invest in our people. They're the most precious natural resource God has given us, and you do that by expanding opportunity through education. And so we can certainly do better as a state by giving our kids more opportunity to live the American dream right here in Louisiana through better education. Thank you all.
Yeah, just real quickly, I just wanted to thank Dr. Hester for her great work and Dr. Cope for his great work on organizing this as well. But lastly, with everything that being said, is that integral to educational transformation in the state of Louisiana is teacher preparation. And teacher education has to be truly emphasized, and that's high achieving nations. A key is working on teacher education and preparation. Thank you.
Yes, we live in a state that is so rich in natural resources, and yet we're so poor in economic prosperity. And we have a people that are so strong in spirit and culture, I think second to none, and yet the physical health and shape of our people is still quite poor. And I think the key to winning in both of those cases is higher education, and that's the message that we have to give to our fellow citizens.
King asked the question, where do we go from here? It is my hope that we leave here energized and charged to develop a strategy to ensure that higher education is at the forefront where it rightly deserves. It will not be an easy, journey, but everyone in here, you have overcome many challenges and circumstances along the way. But we need to see you. We need you to be visible. We need you to be vigilant. We need you to be involved as we overtake this great hurdle. Because I do believe, as my colleague Representative Edwards said, our best days are ahead. But it's not going to be easy. Please don't leave here thinking, oh, it's going to be a piece of cake. Let me call my legislator, because there are some of our colleagues in different areas. You can talk to them till the sun comes down and up. It's a challenge. But we need you, and we have the commitment that we're going to do what's right and what's decent. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. All right, we're going to have final remarks by Sonia Hester.
Let's give our panelists another round of applause. And thank you, Ms. Holmes. You did an exquisite job. Chancellor Clark of LSU-S sends his regrets. He wanted to be here, has been traveling, and I see some of my colleagues from LSU-S in the audience. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Everybody for being here. This has truly been a wonderful dialogue, a conglomerate of us coming together from across the state. W-O-W. Wow. I have to say it. I know there's a separation between church and state, but to God be the glory. I sure have to say that. You know, bad things happen when good people do nothing. Say that with me. Bad things happen when good people do nothing. It's good that we're here. This is wonderful. The press has been here. We've done a great job. We have some wonderful discussion. But if we leave here and do nothing, that's exactly is what's going to happen. Nothing. So let's continue the conversation. Let's continue the energy. And let's continue to propel higher education forward. Thank you, Dr. Belton, for being here. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for being here. And I have to say a special thank you to our Southern University at Shreveport Faculty Senate. Will you please stand and be recognized? And our AAUP, will you please stand? Wonderful, thank you so much. Please don't leave. We worked hard to prepare something delicious. We've had food for thought, and now we want to encourage you to take in food for your body. So join us downstairs. Thank you so much. We are hereby dismissed.